Hey there and welcome to Beyond the Veil. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep, offering stories and gentle guidance. Before we settle into dreamland, let me know in the comments. Which country are you from? And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more restful nights. I still remember the first time I laid eyes on the old Victorian house on Hollow Street, crouched behind a line of skeletal trees like a living thing waiting to pounce. My mother had fallen in love with it instantly, an affordable opportunity, she insisted. The stained glass windows and elaborate turrets gave the house a strange, looming elegance, though it was layered in dust and neglect. My father, never one to argue, shrugged and wrote the check. They said the house had character, an odd word for a place that gave me the creeps. From the first day something felt off. The moment we unlocked the front door, an icy draft licked across my ankles. It was the middle of July and outside, the scorching sun baked the weeds in the yard. Yet the interior seemed trapped in a perpetual chill. The realtor explained that older homes often had temperamental insulation, but the atmosphere felt heavier than mere cold air. We spent the afternoon hauling in boxes, navigating a maze of narrow corridors and staircases that seemed to twist in unexpected directions. Once or twice I thought I saw a shadow flit around a corner, but whenever I tried to catch it, I found nothing. In the grand foyer, a massive chandelier dangled from the ceiling, dusty crystals tinkling with each subtle draft of wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was breathing, exhaling its stale air onto us in slow, measured rhythms. Night fell quickly our first evening in the house. We set up makeshift beds in the large living room because the bedrooms were still full of stacked boxes. The darkness felt thicker here, the corners of the room receding into pitch-black spaces. Around midnight, I woke to a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. At first, I convinced myself it was just the old house settling. But it continued, an irregular scratch that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped. Heart pounding, I stared into the darkness, certain I was imagining things. Then, just as I started to drift off again, I heard a creak from the corridor. It was a gentle shuffle, like someone barefoot shuffling along the ancient floorboards. I froze, peering over the edge of my makeshift bed. Through the archway, a pale shape seemed to move. I blinked and it was gone, swallowed by the gloom. In the morning, I told my mother about it. She laughed and said, "Just your nerves. This place is old and you're letting your imagination run wild." My father nodded in agreement, though I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. Maybe he had heard something too, but neither of them wanted to face it. Despite my apprehension, a small thrill surged inside me. This was more than a drafty old building. Something else lived here and I was determined to find out what, or who, it was. We spent the next few days unpacking and exploring the house's labyrinthine rooms. Each space had its own creaks, its own drafts, and an uncanny sense of having been left mid-story by whoever lived here before us. I was drawn to the attic, an expansive, dusty chamber that smelled of moth-eaten fabric and dry rot. Sunlight filtered through the grimy dormer windows, illuminating piles of old trunks and broken furniture. It felt like a museum of someone else's memories. While rummaging through a dilapidated trunk, I found a collection of old photographs. They showed a grim-faced family posed stiffly in front of the same front door we now called ours. The father, tall and gaunt, wore a look of stern disapproval. The mother had hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to stare right through the camera. Two small children stood in front, unsmiling, each with the same unsettling pallor. No one had scrawled names or dates on the back. The pictures felt like secrets half buried under decades of dust. I decided to show the photos to my parents. My father shrugged it off. "It's an old house," he said. "Lots of families must have lived here. Don't let it get under your skin." My mother, meanwhile, was more curious than bothered, wondering if we could frame them as quirky decor. But something in those faces made me shudder. It felt wrong to treat them like wall ornaments. That night, the scratching in the walls returned. I was sure I heard tiny footsteps as well, scuttling behind the plaster. My mother suggested mice, so we laid traps in the corners. Yet the footprints sounded heavier than mice. I thought about the pale shape I had seen in the hallway. My heart pounded every time I recalled it. On the third night, I woke abruptly to the sound of music, faint, tinny piano notes echoing from somewhere deep in the house. I slipped out of bed, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and crept into the corridor. The hallway was cold, the walls damp as if they were sweating. Step by cautious step, I followed the notes toward the grand foyer. But the foyer was silent. The chandelier above glimmered weakly in the moonlight, casting ghostly reflections on the walls. Just when I convinced myself I'd imagined the piano entirely, A single note chimed from the direction of the parlor, low, resonant, and undeniably real. I reached the parlor door to find it ajar. The old upright piano in the corner was uncovered, keys exposed as if inviting someone to play. But no one was there. A gust of cold air brushed against me, rustling the sheet music. I ran my fingers over the keys, half expecting them to be warm from recent contact. They felt freezing. My pulse hammered. Then a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat. Nothing. Nothing but shadows. Suddenly terrified, I fled back to my room, the phantom piano still echoing in my ears. Whatever presence haunted this house, it wasn't content to remain hidden in the walls anymore. By daylight, the house's haunting qualities seemed to fade into the background. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight, and the faint mustiness became almost tolerable with windows flung open. My father convinced a local handyman, Mr. Elias, to check for structural issues. He hammered, pried, and inspected. His verdict: the place is old and settling, but I see no major damage. When I asked about mice or raccoons in the walls, he shook his head. Didn't see any signs of pests, miss. Despite his reassurance, I couldn't forget the piano's ghostly music or the footprints in the dark. My mother was busy redecorating, determined to make the house look more homey. She replaced dusty drapes with bright curtains, set potted plants on windowsills, and hung cheerful paintings over the faded wallpaper. Each step, however, felt like putting a bandage over a deeper wound. My father decided to store our excess boxes in the attic. I followed him up the narrow staircase to help, but mostly I was curious to explore more. We shifted crates and trunks around, stirring up clouds of choking dust. In one corner, partially hidden behind a broken rocking chair, I discovered a small door, no more than 4 feet high and latched shut with a rusted padlock. My father tried to open it but declared the lock immovable. Something about that small, secret door fascinated me. I wondered if it led to a crawl space or a concealed storage area. The sense of mystery made my heart thrum with equal parts excitement and dread. Before leaving the attic, I caught sight of old footprints in the dust near that door, too large for a child but somehow off in proportion, like someone had been limping or dragging a foot. Later that evening, I dared mention the door to my mother. She shrugged. These Victorian houses have all sorts of nooks and crannies. Probably nothing interesting. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something behind that door that might explain the house's eerie presence. That night, a thunderstorm broke overhead. Rain hammered the roof, and lightning lit up the sky in jagged flashes. The electricity flickered twice before failing altogether, plunging the house into darkness. My mother lit a cluster of candles in the living room, their warm glow dancing on the walls. As the storm raged, the walls seemed to groan in response, and the chandelier tinkled eerily in the drafts. My father left for the basement to check the circuit breakers. Minutes passed and I grew increasingly uneasy. The wind howled outside, making the windows rattle. Then I heard a door slam upstairs, a thunderous crash that made me jump. The hair on my arms stood on end. Grabbing a candle, I ventured up the stairs, calling for my father. Lightning flashed through the hallway window, revealing the silhouette of something at the far end of the corridor, tall, thin, and vaguely human. I froze. Another flash and it was gone. As thunder shook the house, I felt trapped in a living nightmare, uncertain what might loom in the next flicker of lightning. When the lights finally returned, my father emerged from the basement, puzzled but unharmed. He claimed a fuse had blown, though he looked visibly shaken. I asked if he'd heard the slamming door. He admitted he had, but chalked it up to the gusting wind. I didn't argue, but deep down I knew it was more than that. The way the door had crashed sounded purposeful, angry even. Morning brought a restless sense of tension. I overheard my parents whispering about my behavior, wondering if I needed more time to adjust. They also confessed to hearing strange noises but insisted it was merely the house settling. They were trying to reassure themselves as much as they were trying to reassure me. In a burst of determination, I returned to the attic. The small locked door beckoned like a secret. Armed with a flashlight and a strong urge for answers, I tried prying at the hinges. They were rusted solid. I listened closely, pressing my ear to the door. At first, I heard nothing but my own breathing. Then came the faintest scrape, like someone shifting on the other side. My heart hammered. For several long seconds, I stood frozen in indecision. Could there be a trapped animal? Or was it something worse? Fear warred with curiosity, but eventually fear won. I retreated downstairs, my mind buzzing with questions. Later, I tried to immerse myself in normalcy, heading into town for groceries with my mother. The quaint little shops and friendly neighbors momentarily pushed the house's horrors from my mind. But upon our return, that uneasy chill crept right back under my skin. We discovered that some boxes had been toppled in the living room. The contents, old photo albums and knickknacks, were scattered across the floor. My father assumed an intruder had broken in. Yet the doors were locked and there was no sign of forced entry. As we cleaned up, I noticed a single photograph had been placed, almost deliberately, on top of the scattered pile. It was from the dusty set I'd found in the attic, showing that grim family standing at our front doorstep. A single word was scrawled in black ink across the mother's dress: mine. It looked fresh, the ink still glossy under the overhead light. None of us could explain it. That night, the house felt alive with tension. My mother insisted we all sleep in the same room, half laughing as though it were a fun family campout. My father tried to keep the mood light, but we all felt the shared dread. Sometime after midnight, I woke to see my mother sitting up, eyes wide in the dim glow of the nightlight. She whispered that she heard someone breathing just outside the door, steady and slow, like they were waiting. We held our breath, listening, but eventually the breathing faded. None of us slept well the rest of that night. By dawn, I was certain. Whatever haunted this place had become bolder. It wasn't content to remain an unseen presence. It wanted us to know it was there, and it was growing increasingly hostile. I decided to do some research. There had to be a reason this house felt so steeped in malevolence. While my parents continued with renovations, my mother sanding old banisters and my father repainting window frames, I headed to the local library. The librarian, a kindly old woman named Mrs. Whitley, seemed surprised when I mentioned the address. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of worry. "I recall hearing stories about that house," she said softly, glancing around as if someone might be eavesdropping. "Tragedies mostly. But the records are incomplete." She led me to an archive room filled with dusty newspaper clippings. "Look under local property archives and old police reports," she suggested. Hours passed as I pored over brittle yellow pages. Snippets jumped out at me: unexplained disappearance, mysterious accidents, house rumored to be cursed. The articles referenced a string of unfortunate events dating back nearly a century: fires, sudden illnesses, even suicides. But the records were often vague, with details missing or entire pages seemingly torn away. One thing became clear: families who moved into that house rarely stayed long. I stumbled upon a mention of the family from the photos. Their surname was Camden. According to an old article, Mr. Camden had been found dead under suspicious circumstances, and his wife was committed to an asylum shortly after. The children vanished without a trace. The story ended abruptly with no follow-up. It sent a chill through me to think their final photograph was lying in our attic, that their ghostly footprints might still echo through our halls. When I got home, I shared my findings with my mother. She tried to keep a brave face, but I could see her horror. My father, on the other hand, grew visibly angry. "We're not about to run off because of old rumors," he declared. "We've invested too much here." His dismissal felt more like denial than confidence. That evening, the house felt even darker. A storm brewed outside, thunderheads rolling in with ominous speed. Flashes of lightning illuminated the stained glass windows, sending fractured colors dancing across the walls. Every gust of wind rattled the window panes as though something was trying to force its way in or out. Determined to face my fear, I ventured back to the attic. The door was still locked, but now an acrid smell leaked from the edges. It reminded me of decaying leaves or damp soil. I pressed my ear against the wood again. This time I heard a soft scraping and then a faint moan, almost human. My stomach lurched in terror. Something was definitely on the other side. Before I could decide what to do, lightning struck close by, shaking the entire house. The attic light flickered, and in that split second of darkness, I heard a whisper, crystal clear and hateful: "Go away." My courage evaporated. I sprinted downstairs, nearly tumbling over the last step. Whatever lurked behind that door was no longer content with subtlety. It had a voice, and it was warning me. My parents could sense my escalating fear. That night, they asked me to join them in the living room for a family discussion. My mother was pale, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own lack of sleep. My father paced back and forth as if searching for the right words. Finally, he admitted he'd been hearing strange noises too: footsteps in the basement when no one was there, distant knocks on the walls. Relief washed over me. At least they believed me now. But with that validation came a deeper dread. If we all acknowledged it, we had to face the fact that something beyond normal explanation was happening. My father suggested we reach out to a local priest for a blessing, a move that felt almost medieval in our modern world. My mother agreed, desperate for any solution. Before we could take any action, however, the house made its displeasure known. Around midnight, a high-pitched wail reverberated through every corridor, a shriek that sounded both human and inhuman at once. We bolted upright in our beds. My father grabbed a flashlight and stormed into the hallway, calling out for whoever, or whatever, was making that noise. I followed close behind, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear. The wail led us down to the first floor, then through a cramped hallway we seldom used. At the end stood a door I barely recognized, its paint peeling. My father hesitated, then slowly pushed it open. The smell of mildew hit us immediately. This must have been a storage closet or servant's room in the house's earlier days. Inside, the single overhead bulb flickered. The room was small, barely large enough for the shelves along the walls. Dust coated everything. Yet the wailing stopped the moment we entered, replaced by a heavy silence. My mother, who had come up behind us, whispered, "What is this place?" Then we saw it, fresh footprints in the dust, leading to a corner where old linens and junk were piled. In that corner, something glowed faintly, an odd red luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. My father approached with trembling steps. Just as his flashlight beam fell on the glowing spot, the bulb overhead popped, plunging us into darkness. My mother screamed. My father barked at me to turn on my phone's flashlight, but my hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. By the time I got the phone light aimed, the glow had vanished. The footprints remained, but whatever made them was gone, if it had ever been there in a tangible sense. We hurried out, barricading the door behind us with old furniture. It was a futile gesture, but we felt compelled to do something. My parents decided it was time to call for help from anyone who knew about these matters. We hoped a blessing or some kind of cleansing ritual might restore peace. Deep down, I sensed the house was laughing at us. Its walls seemed to hum with malevolent satisfaction, as though every ounce of fear we felt only made it stronger. Father McCormick arrived the following afternoon. He was a kindly man in his late 60s, with white hair and a gentle demeanor that reminded me of a grandfather. I wasn't sure if a simple blessing would work on a house steeped in such darkness, but we were ready to try anything. He walked through each room, sprinkling holy water and murmuring prayers. At first, nothing dramatic happened. I noticed a slight shift in the atmosphere, an uneasy stillness, like the house itself was holding its breath. My parents trailed behind him, whispering about the footsteps and the wailing. Father McCormick listened patiently, then suggested we gather in the living room for a final prayer. All seemed calm until he began reciting Psalm 91. Midway through, the chandelier above us started to sway. Its dusty crystals clinked together in an unsettling rhythm. Then a sudden gust of wind blew in, strong enough to rattle the windows and snuff out half the candles we'd lit. Father McCormick paused, eyes narrowing. He continued praying, raising his voice above the rising clamor. A thunderous crash echoed from upstairs, followed by what sounded like frenzied footsteps racing along the corridor. We all stood, paralyzed by fear. The footsteps thundered above us, moving from one end of the house to the other, then abruptly stopped. Silence fell, and Father McCormick concluded his prayer with a trembling amen. He pressed his crucifix to his lips, sweat beading on his forehead. "Whatever dwells here opposes the light," he said quietly. "I've done what I can, but this place harbors a deep shadow. It may take more than a simple blessing." After he left, the house felt strangely subdued, like an angry child that had finally grown tired of throwing tantrums. My mother and father clung to the hope that we'd seen the worst of it. I, on the other hand, couldn't help feeling we'd only provoked something ancient and vengeful. That night, the gloom returned with a vengeance. I heard a faint scraping from the attic again, but this time it was accompanied by muffled sobbing. It sounded like a child weeping, the cries drifting through the ducts. With shaking hands, I crept to my bedroom door, pressing my ear against it. The sobbing grew louder, and for a moment I thought I heard words, "Let me out, let me out." I froze, tears stinging my eyes. Was there a child trapped in the attic? Or was it the echo of those children from the old Camden family, lost in time and despair? My heart shattered at the sound of such sorrow, even as terror rooted me in place. I wanted to help, but I feared drawing the entity's wrath. Unable to sleep, I sat by my window, staring at the moonlit yard. Shadows shifted among the trees. Every so often I thought I saw a silhouette, pale and thin, slipping between the trunks. I wished desperately that Father McCormick's blessing had been enough. But the house's silence felt more ominous than ever, like it was merely gathering strength for something far worse. Unable to endure the torment alone, I confided in a classmate named Lily, who was known around school for her fascination with the paranormal. She had a reputation for performing amateur seances and collecting stories of hauntings. I never paid much attention before, but now I was desperate. When I told her about the house, her eyes lit up with both fear and excitement. "My grandmother taught me some old folk rites," Lily said. "We can try to contact the spirit directly, find out what it wants." The idea made my stomach twist, but I agreed. If speaking to it could bring answers, or closure, I was willing to risk it. We planned for a Thursday afternoon right after school while my parents were out shopping. Lily arrived with a small bag filled with candles, salt, and something she called a talking board. It was handmade, carved with letters and numbers, and an ornate sun and moon design in the corners. She insisted we needed to hold the session in the attic, where the energy felt strongest. My hands shook as we climbed the attic stairs. The stale, cold air seemed thicker than usual. The locked door in the corner remained as foreboding as ever, the faint smell of decay drifting from its seams. Lily set up a small circle of candles and sprinkled a ring of salt around us. The moment we lit the candles, a hush fell over the attic as if the house itself were listening. We placed our fingertips on the planchette, and Lily began her invocation. "Spirits within this house, we invite you to speak. Share your name, your story, and your desire." At first, nothing happened. Then a draft brushed against my face, extinguishing one of the candles. The planchette trembled. It slid, almost imperceptibly, toward the letter M. My heart pounded. Lily whispered, "That could be the Camden mother's initial, or something else." We asked another question. "Why do you remain?" And the planchette jerked violently across the board, spelling out, "Dark." Suddenly, the locked door rattled, the padlock clanging as though someone on the other side was shaking it. Fear seized me, but Lily pressed on. "What is dark?" "What do you mean?" she asked. The planchette screeched across the board, landing on no letters, just spinning in place. A faint moan filled the air, the same moan I'd heard days before. Without warning, the attic light flickered and the overhead bulb exploded, showering us with sparks. We screamed and scrambled backward. The planchette flew off the board, hitting the wall with a dull thud. In the candlelight, I saw a shadow detach from the corner and slide across the floor, heading straight for the locked door. A slam echoed, followed by a low, guttural growl. Then everything went still. Shaking, Lily hurriedly packed up her things. She mumbled apologies, saying she'd never felt such malevolence before. When she was gone, I sat there, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. The house's message was clear. It was filled with darkness, and it would not be banished easily. After the seance disaster, I felt more isolated than ever. Lily refused to talk about it at school, avoiding my eyes whenever we crossed paths in the hallway. It was as if she regretted brushing up against something truly evil. At home, my parents sensed my agitation but seemed equally troubled themselves. My mother's eyes darted nervously whenever she heard a creak, and my father began sleeping with a lamp on. Desperate for a sense of safety, my mother decided we should all sleep in the living room again, bringing pillows and blankets to form a little fortress around the fireplace. We hoped to ward off nightmares by clustering together, but the unspoken truth was we felt powerless. That night, as we huddled in the glow of the dying embers, a slow tapping sound began in the walls. It moved steadily around the perimeter of the room as though someone, or something, walked outside, knocking softly. My mother clasped my hand, tears in her eyes. My father clenched his jaw, brandishing a flashlight like it was a weapon. The tapping circled the living room 3 times before stopping abruptly. We waited, breaths held, for whatever came next. Then a single heavy thud sounded from the front door. My father summoned the courage to check, flinging it open to reveal an empty porch. The wind rustled the overgrown shrubs, but there was no sign of an intruder. He closed the door and locked it, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost. We drifted into a fitful sleep around dawn. I dreamed of a tall, shadowy figure watching me from the attic, whispering my name over and over. When I woke, the fireplace ashes were scattered across the floor, forming what looked like footprints leading to the hallway. None of us had moved from the living room that night. Determined to find a solution, my father began calling anyone who might help. Spiritualists, mediums, anyone with a reputation for dealing with the supernatural. Most were charlatans charging outrageous fees or refused to come once they heard the house's address. Eventually, he managed to hire a local paranormal investigation team. 3 self-styled ghost hunters armed with cameras and electromagnetic detectors. They showed up after dark, brimming with enthusiasm. As they set up their equipment, I felt a faint surge of hope. Maybe they could capture evidence that would prove our story. Maybe proof would lead to answers. The investigators roamed the corridors, shining ultraviolet lights on the walls. Their leader, a man named Vincent, claimed he could sense a vortex of negative energy near the attic door. But after a few hours, their gadgets beeped sporadically without capturing anything definitive. Just as they were about to pack up, one of their cameras picked up a faint silhouette at the top of the stairs, a pale figure with hollow eyes gone in a blink. They froze the frame, hearts pounding. It looked human but not quite. My parents exchanged a terrified glance. The investigators offered to return with more advanced gear another night. As they left, I could almost taste the dread in the air. The house had allowed them a glimpse, a tease, as if to say, "I'm here, and I'm watching." The next day, the atmosphere in the house grew suffocating. Every corner felt laced with hostility. My mother tried to coax normalcy by baking cookies, but the sweet smell only served as a grim counterpoint to the rotting odor that occasionally wafted from the attic. Around midday, I mustered the courage to confront the locked attic door once again. I carried a small crowbar, determined to pry it open. If a monstrous secret lay hidden, so be it. I needed the truth. My hands trembled as I positioned the crowbar against the rusted hinges. Each scrape of metal on metal sent adrenaline surging. My efforts produced only a few stubborn groans from the hinges. The lock held fast. As I paused to catch my breath, I heard something sliding just on the other side, like a heavy object being dragged. Then came a voice, faint but anguished. "I'm so cold," it whispered. My blood ran icy. Despite my terror, I responded softly, "Who are you?" No answer, only a series of slow thuds that seemed to move away from the door. By the time I recovered my nerve, I realized I was alone again. I ran downstairs to find my father and convinced him to try together. He frowned but eventually agreed, more out of concern for me than curiosity. We returned to the attic, flashlights in hand. The moment we touched the crowbar to the door, a burst of force rattled it from the inside, nearly knocking us backward. My father paled, muttering, "What was that?" We could only stare in horror as the door continued to shudder, as if someone on the other side was beating it with frantic fists. Then it all stopped. Silence fell, broken only by our ragged breathing. My father, shaken, guided me downstairs. He decided to leave the door alone, convinced now that something truly malevolent was trapped within. That night, as we tried to sleep, I replayed the event in my mind. The voice, the banging, it was screaming for freedom or fighting to keep us out. Either way, it was furious. The next morning, my mother woke with dark circles under her eyes, complaining of vivid nightmares. She couldn't recall them clearly, only that she felt suffocated by a cold presence. My father looked equally haggard, though he tried to hide it behind a stoic exterior. The house devoured our energy day by day. Desperate, I phoned Mrs. Whitley at the library, asking if she knew of any local legends about sealing evil behind doors. She promised to do more digging. Time dragged as I waited for her call. Every day in that house was a trial, each creak sending my heart racing. I kept glancing at the attic ceiling, half expecting it to crack open and unleash whatever roamed behind that locked door. That evening, I dreamed of black vines creeping from the doorframe, snaking into my room. In the dream, I couldn't move or scream, pinned by an unseen force. The vines tightened around my neck until I jerked awake, gasping for air. The message was clear enough. The entity wasn't done with us. It would escalate until it finally had what it wanted. Mrs. Whitley called a few days later, her voice tense. She'd uncovered more about the Camden family from archived estate documents. Rumor had it they'd practiced some form of dark ritual, perhaps to ward off illness or misfortune. She found references to binding an abomination in the highest chamber, which likely referred to the attic. Whatever they had sealed away, it seemed they had hoped to trap it forever. Hearing this sent a fresh wave of dread through me. The Camden family had locked something up there, and now it was stirring because we had intruded on its prison. My parents listened in grim silence as I relayed the news. My mother's hands shook. My father clenched his jaw, face tight with worry. Determined to end this, we contacted a local historian, Dr. Adrienne Klein, who specialized in folklore and occult history. She arrived at our house on a stormy afternoon, carrying thick tomes and a resolute expression. After examining the attic door, running her fingertips over the rusted hinges and murmuring something under her breath, she sat us down in the living room. "This is more than a simple ghost," Dr. Klein explained. "It's possible the Camdens bound a malevolent entity here, something older and darker than a human spirit. I suspect they performed a ritual to keep it contained. That would explain the padlock, which may be part of the seal." She advised us not to try breaking the lock again. Instead, she offered to conduct a ritual of her own, a reconsecration to strengthen the seal. My father agreed immediately while my mother trembled at the thought of dabbling in magic. I, however, felt a faint spark of hope. If Dr. Klein's knowledge could reinforce the barrier, perhaps we'd regain our home. Or at least keep the entity locked away. That night, we followed Dr. Klein's instructions, gathering herbs and chalking symbols on the attic steps. She chanted in a language I didn't recognize, sprinkling salt and the ashes of certain herbs around the locked door. My parents and I stood in a semicircle, hearts pounding. The air felt charged, crackling like static before a lightning strike. For a while it seemed to work. The door remained still, the attic silent. Then, out of nowhere, a deafening roar tore through the house. The walls vibrated and floorboards threatened to buckle. The padlock shook violently, clattering against the door. A wave of noxious odor washed over us, making me gag. Dr. Klein continued chanting, sweat pouring down her forehead. Finally, the upheaval stopped. Silence descended almost too suddenly. Dr. Klein signaled for us to exit. We stumbled downstairs, dazed and coughing. She told us to remain vigilant, but she believed the ritual had at least temporarily contained the entity. Exhausted relief coursed through me, though I couldn't ignore the sickening dread in the pit of my stomach. We disrupted something powerful. I prayed it stayed sealed behind the door. Yet that very night, I dreamed of the door again. In the dream, it swung open on its own, revealing a black void that seemed to pulsate with hatred. The house might have been quiet for now, but I sensed we were merely living on borrowed time. A brief calm settled over the house in the following days. The unnerving footsteps and whispers lessened. My parents managed to get more than a few hours sleep. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. But the house had a way of luring us into complacency before striking anew. Dr. Klein's ritual seemed successful, but she warned us that malevolent forces, especially ancient ones, seldom give up easily. We walked on eggshells, bracing for any sign that the entity was pushing against its confines. I decided to test the waters by returning to the attic, not to open the door but to see if the smell or the aura had changed. The second I climbed the steps, an uneasy shiver passed through me. The locked door looked the same, though a faint scorch mark now marred the wood, possibly from the intense spiritual energy unleashed during the ritual. No movement, no whispering. I exhaled, allowing myself to hope that Dr. Klein's magic held. Downstairs, the mood was lighter. My mother put on music as she cooked dinner, actual, cheerful music that didn't seem to incite the house's wrath. My father whistled along, which made me smile for the first time in days. The three of us sat down to eat, the warm glow of the kitchen lamps chasing away the gloom. Just as we finished, the front door rattled. We exchanged glances, unsure if someone was knocking or if it was the wind. My father went to check, calling out a greeting, but no one answered. He opened the door to find a single dead crow on the welcome mat. Its eyes were cloudy, wings splayed as though it had fallen from the sky. A chill snaked through me. My mother gasped, recoiling in horror. My father disposed of the bird, trying to brush it off as an unfortunate accident. But I saw the fear in his eyes. The next morning, 2 more crows lay on the lawn. The day after, we found 3. Each time, their bodies were arranged in a neat row as if placed there intentionally. This was no random occurrence. It felt like a warning. When I called Dr. Klein to report the disturbing phenomenon, she sounded alarmed. The entity may be mustering external signs of its influence, she said. Symbols of death and ill omens are common in darker hauntings. Stay vigilant. That night, a storm gathered overhead. Thunder boomed, shaking the windows. Lightning cast fleeting shadows of the tree branches across the walls, making them writhe like living things. I huddled on the couch, a candle by my side, power flickering in and out. Each time the lightning flashed, I glimpsed a figure standing by the bay window, a slender silhouette. But whenever I switched on the flashlight, it vanished. Sometime after midnight, I heard the attic door rattle again. This time it sounded stronger, more insistent. My heart hammered as I realized Dr. Klein's ritual might be weakening. Something was pushing from the other side, threatening to break free. By now, my family was living in a state of perpetual dread. My mother begged my father to consider moving, even if it meant taking a financial loss. He resisted, torn between pride and fear. He kept saying, "We've put so much into this place," like it was some twisted measure of our determination. But I saw the terror in his eyes each time the house groaned or footsteps dragged across the ceiling. Late one afternoon, the paranormal investigators returned with more sophisticated equipment. They brought thermal cameras, spirit boxes, and electromagnetic sensors. Vincent, their leader, claimed they'd capture irrefutable evidence this time. Part of me wanted them to succeed. Proof would validate our ordeal. Another part feared what the house might do if we provoked it again. They set up in the living room, scanning doorways and corridors with their cameras. The sensors beeped erratically but never provided solid data. Growing frustrated, Vincent suggested we venture to the attic together, despite my warnings about the locked door. My parents reluctantly agreed, desperate for any breakthrough. The moment we climbed the stairs, the temperature plummeted. Our breath condensed into misty puffs in front of our faces. The attic was unnaturally dark, the single overhead bulb flickering like a dying heartbeat. Vincent's thermal camera showed cold spots swirling near the corners. One of the investigators, a young woman named Maria, began trembling. That's when the door shook violently. Our flashlights caught a glimpse of the padlock twisting on its own, metal scraping as though corroding under immense pressure. A deep moan reverberated through the attic, making my teeth chatter. Vincent aimed his spirit box at the door, static crackling. Over the hiss, a voice emerged, hollow, distorted, and chilling. "Let me out!" Maria shrieked, dropping her equipment. Vincent's bravado faltered. My parents stood on either side of me, terror carved into their expressions. The voice continued, layered and inhuman. "You are mine." Each word felt like a physical blow, shaking the floorboards. Suddenly, the investigator's gear malfunctioned. Batteries drained, screens went black. The overhead bulb exploded, showering us with glass. In the darkness, a piercing roar erupted from behind the door. I swore I felt the floor tilt as if the attic itself was warping. We stumbled over each other, fleeing down the staircase. Back in the living room, we caught our breath, hearts pounding as though we'd run a marathon. The investigators were pale as sheetrock, hands shaking uncontrollably. Vincent's voice quivered when he finally spoke. "Whatever that is, it's beyond us," he admitted. "You need serious help, someone who understands demonology or advanced exorcisms." They packed up and left in a hurry, slamming the door behind them. My father sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. My mother clutched me close, her eyes brimming with tears. We had documented proof now, but it brought zero comfort. Instead, it confirmed our worst fears. The entity was powerful, intelligent, and furious that we dared to inhabit its domain. After that horrifying attic encounter, we barricaded ourselves in the lower part of the house. The second floor and attic felt too dangerous to roam freely. My father boarded up the attic door from the outside, hammering in thick wooden planks. It was a desperate measure, but we were beyond rational solutions. That night, none of us slept well. Every creak or groan set us on edge. My mother and I shared the sofa, while my father dozed fitfully in an armchair. Around 3 a.m. I bolted upright. The television, which had been off, suddenly flickered to life, static dancing across the screen. A faint voice crackled, whispering my name. My skin crawled. We fumbled for the remote, but the TV wouldn't turn off. My father had to unplug it entirely to kill the static. In that restless darkness, I sensed movement in the hallway. Grabbing a flashlight, I ventured out just far enough to see pale footprints on the floorboards, wet as if someone had walked through water. They led toward the stairs but abruptly ended, the last print smeared into a trailing shape like a dragging foot. We tried contacting Dr. Klein again, but she was out of town on a research trip. In desperation, my father phoned another spiritual advisor recommended by a friend. Reverend Sims arrived at dawn, a tall man with quiet confidence. He listened calmly as we recounted our plight, then insisted on seeing the attic with his own eyes. We told him it was boarded up, but he was undeterred. Together we ascended the stairs. The boards my father had nailed across the door were partially splintered, as though struck from within. Reverend Sims placed his hand on the wood, closing his eyes as if in prayer. He shuddered. "There is a presence here, an ancient darkness," he murmured. "I'll attempt a cleansing. But be warned, this battle may not be easily won." What followed was a tense ritual, with Reverend Sims chanting verses in a firm, resonant voice. Unlike Father McCormick, who had seemed frail in the face of the entity's strength, Reverend Sims exuded calm authority. A hush fell over the house. For a moment I almost believed we had a chance. Then a deep growl reverberated, shaking the boards like a wild animal trapped behind them. Reverend Sims yelled for us to hold on to something. The entire staircase trembled. My mother screamed as cracks appeared in the wall plaster, spiderwebbing outward. A sudden wind gusted up the stairs, howling around us. It carried the stench of rot and death. Reverend Sims shouted a final line of scripture, voice echoing above the gale. Then as quickly as it came, the wind ceased. Panting, we found ourselves covered in dust and debris. The board still held, though one had snapped in half. The door no longer rattled. Reverend Sims staggered back, sweat streaming down his face. "I forced it into dormancy," he gasped. "But it's not banished. You need to leave this house if you value your lives." His warning froze my father in place. Fear and pride warred on his face. The rest of us looked at him, silently begging him to agree. But no words came. With a weary sigh, Reverend Sims left, leaving us in a hushed corridor thick with terror. The choice was ours: stay and risk our souls, or flee and lose everything we'd invested. Even after Reverend Sims's partial success, the ominous aura persisted. My father, still torn, wouldn't commit to leaving. He insisted that whatever this was, we could overcome it. My mother and I felt less certain. I found myself on edge every minute, waiting for the house to lash out again. In a moment of frayed nerves, my mother turned on my father, accusing him of risking our lives for pride. They argued fiercely in the living room, voices carrying through the house. A door slammed somewhere upstairs, as if the house itself was reacting to their anger. Finally, my father stormed outside, pacing the yard while my mother sobbed. I tried to comfort her, but how could I reassure anyone when we lived under a roof that breathed malice? Eventually, I headed upstairs, wanting to retrieve a few personal items from my bedroom. Fear clenched my stomach. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step making the wooden steps groan like a warning. As I passed the attic door, I couldn't help pausing to listen. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe the seal was truly holding. Then faintly I heard it, a scratching sound like claws on wood. My pulse kicked into overdrive, but I hurried on. In my bedroom, I found my diary and some clothes, stuffing them into a bag. That's when I noticed the mirror above my dresser. My reflection was pale, eyes haunted, but there was something else. A shadowy figure stood behind me. I spun around and it disappeared. My legs nearly gave out. I'd never felt more hunted in my own home. Rushing downstairs, I nearly collided with my father in the foyer. He'd come back inside, looking grim but resolute. "We're leaving," he announced abruptly. Relief flooded me. "Your mother's already packing," he added. "We'll stay at a motel until we can decide on next steps." We scrambled to throw essentials into suitcases. The house felt strangely calm, as if it sensed we were escaping and was biding its time. My father left to bring the car closer to the front steps. My mother lugged a small bag out to the porch. Alone in the foyer, I heard a soft click behind me. The door to the corridor that led to the living room had swung shut by itself. I gripped the doorknob, turning it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged. The house was trying to trap me. I pounded on the wood, screaming for help. My mother came running, jiggling the knob from the other side. It refused to open, as if held by invisible hands. Suddenly, the lock clicked and the door flew open, nearly hitting my mother in the face. We stumbled into each other, hearts racing. Without a word, we grabbed the last of our belongings and rushed outside. The moment our feet touched the porch, an agonized howl echoed from inside, like a wounded beast losing its prey. We drove away, hearts pounding, leaving the house in our rearview mirror. I looked back once, glimpsing a shadow in the upstairs window. Even from a distance, I felt the weight of its stare. We were leaving, but I suspected this was far from over. The motel we chose was a rundown place near the edge of town, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the horror we'd fled. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a strange comfort in their mundane glow. My parents and I dropped onto the squeaky beds, drained of energy. For the first time in weeks, the walls around us felt inert and safe. Yet, as exhaustion took hold, my dreams were still plagued by the house. I saw the attic door wide open, darkness oozing out like tar. Faces pressed out of the shadows, anguished, hungry, and familiar. One face resembled mine, twisted in a silent scream. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Morning brought a semblance of calm. Over a stale breakfast from the vending machine, we discussed our next move. My mother wanted to hire a real estate agent to sell the house immediately, no matter the financial cost. My father mulled it over, brow furrowed. I quietly prayed he would agree. I never wanted to set foot in that house again. Before we could reach a final decision, we received a call on my father's cell phone. The number was unfamiliar. My father answered, and I watched his expression darken. "Who is this?" he demanded. Then his complexion turned ashen. He listened, silent, for a full minute before hanging up. "A neighbor found our front door wide open," he explained, voice shaking. "She heard noises inside, crashes and moans. She thought we'd returned. But when she called out, something slammed the door in her face. My stomach lurched. Even in our absence, the house was active, maybe even more so. Despite our fear, we felt responsible for at least securing the property. My father decided to drive back and make sure it was locked, or at least confirm no one had broken in. I insisted on coming with him, not wanting to let him face that place alone. My mother, terrified, chose to stay at the motel. The drive felt surreal, tension building with each mile. When we pulled up to the house, the sky was overcast, casting the property in a dull gloom. Sure enough, the front door stood ajar. The porch steps creaked under our weight like a warning. Inside, the foyer was in disarray. Furniture was overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor. A trail of black liquid streaked across the hall, like something had been dragged. My father turned pale, gripping a flashlight though it was daytime. An unnatural darkness clung to the corners, making everything appear half-lit. We heard footsteps above us, heavy, labored. My father motioned for me to stay behind, but I refused to let him go alone. We crept up the stairs, hearts pounding with each creak. On the landing, a frigid wind buffeted us. My eyes locked on the attic door. The boards my father had hammered were ripped away, splinters scattered across the floor. The padlock lay twisted on the ground as though an immense force had torn it off. We stared at the exposed door, its wood cracked wide. A yawning darkness waited within. My father swallowed hard. "We have to see," he began, voice shaking. A deep moan drifted from inside, echoing through the corridor. My stomach twisted in knots. The entity had broken free. Now we faced the full horror we tried so hard to escape. My father and I exchanged a look of pure dread. We both knew that going into the attic was madness, but we couldn't leave without understanding what was happening. The black liquid on the floor formed a grisly trail leading toward the open door. With every step, a cold sweat dampened my skin. We paused at the threshold, shining our flashlights into the attic's depths. The once dusty space was transformed. Walls dripped with foul-smelling moisture and the floorboards looked warped. An oppressive energy pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. In the center of the attic stood a figure, a shape tall and vaguely human, but distorted in ways that made my eyes water. The darkness around it seemed to pulse like living shadows. A guttural hiss emanated from the entity, and I realized with dawning horror that it was cradling something in its hands. At first, I thought it was a broken doll. Then I recognized it as one of the investigators' cameras, crushed and leaking battery acid. My father raised his flashlight, voice trembling as he shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't speak with words. Instead, the shadows writhed and I felt a pressure in my head, like a voice forcing its way into my thoughts. Fragmented images flashed behind my eyes. The Camden family performing a ritual, the father's body twisted in agony. The mother weeping, children screaming. And beneath it all, an ancient presence laughing as it claimed their souls. The attic door slammed shut behind us, trapping us. My flashlight flickered, and the entity lunged forward. In a surge of panic, my father grabbed a broken piece of the door frame and brandished it like a weapon. To my shock, the shadowy figure recoiled as if in pain. The wood had remnants of the chalked symbols from Dr. Klein's ritual, glowing faintly in the gloom. Seizing the moment, we inched toward the door. The entity roared, a sound that rattled the rafters. It lashed out with an unseen force, knocking my father to the ground. I screamed, lunging toward him. The piece of wood skittered away, leaving us defenseless. The room spun as cold shock waves slammed into me. Spots danced before my eyes. I heard my father shout my name, crawling across the floor toward the warded scrap of wood. The entity towered above us, malevolence pouring off it in waves. Every inhale felt like breathing knives slicing my lungs. My father managed to grasp the wood again, thrusting it up toward the figure. This time, a burst of sparks erupted, accompanied by a sizzling hiss. Clutching each other, we made a desperate dash for the door. It flew open under my father's shove, and we tumbled out onto the landing. The entity screeched behind us, a sound that vibrated with raw hatred. We scrambled down the stairs, nearly falling in our haste. The house shook, pictures falling off walls, windows cracking. We stumbled onto the porch, hearts thundering as the front door slammed shut of its own accord. The yard was eerily still, the overcast sky pressing down. My father and I climbed into the car, breathing like we'd run a marathon. Neither of us spoke. The roar of the engine felt like a lifesaver. As we sped away, I dared a final glance in the rearview mirror. I saw a silhouette in the upstairs window, watching, always watching. We didn't stop driving until we reached the motel, where my mother waited anxiously. One look at our ashen faces and she burst into tears. My father held her, voice trembling as he whispered, "We saw it, it's real, we barely got out." That night, we huddled together, sleepless and traumatized, trying to decide how to close this chapter of our lives without losing our sanity. The next day, under a grim sky, we hired movers to salvage what few possessions we wanted. We refused to step foot inside again. Standing on the sidewalk, we watched from a distance as the movers carried boxes out with wary expressions. None of them reported seeing anything supernatural, but they complained of headaches and a stifling heaviness in the air. Within a week, we officially listed the house for sale. It felt morally wrong, but we needed to cut ties. We disclosed the history and the paranormal issues to prospective buyers, certain it would never sell. To our shock, a private buyer purchased it almost immediately, someone who, the real estate agent whispered, was keen on restoration of historic properties, and didn't balk at the ominous stories. They never introduced themselves, just signed papers through a lawyer. We moved 2 states away, renting a modest home in a quiet suburb. My parents tried to rebuild our lives, focusing on normal routines. New jobs, new school for me. But the scars remained. Nights were the hardest, haunted by memories of that attic door rattling, the entity's roar, and the sickening sense of a dark intelligence watching us from the shadows. Sometimes I still dream of the house on Hollow Street. I see it towering against a stormy sky, windows aglow with that flickering malevolence. In these dreams, the attic door stands open, a black maw beckoning me inside. The voices are there too, wailing or sometimes laughing. I wake drenched in sweat, convinced that no matter how far I run, the memory of that presence will never fade. My mother drifts in and out of nightmares, waking in the middle of the night sobbing. My father rarely speaks of the experience, but I see the burden he carries in his tired eyes. We don't discuss the house much, as if naming it might summon the entity back into our lives. Occasionally, I check local reports online. Whispers claim new residents have been spotted, and rumors circulate about strange lights and sightings. A neighbor wrote on a forum that the front door still slams at odd hours, and that she once heard a child crying in the dead of night. Part of me wants to warn them, to beg them to leave that cursed place behind. But I also know some horrors attract those who are morbidly curious or equally haunted. And so the house stands. It has always stood, feeding on fear and despair. We escaped with our lives, but not entirely unscathed. The entity remains, a silent occupant behind locked doors, until it decides to show itself again. And I know with a cold certainty that one day it will. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His birth certificate listed his mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, but his father's identity was never firmly established. As a child, Ted spent some of his earliest years in Philadelphia, living with his mother and maternal grandparents. The family told people that Louise was actually Ted's older sister, and that his grandparents were his parents. It was a confusing start to life, possibly leaving Ted unsure of his true origins. In his early years, some family members and neighbors saw him as bright, polite, and eager to please. However, there were subtle signs of something amiss. It's often reported that Ted showed a fascination with knives or displayed sudden mood swings, but such stories are hard to fully confirm. Yet from the outside he appeared much like any other boy, playing outside, attending school and reading books. When Ted was around 4, Louise moved to Washington State, and a few years later she married Johnny Bundy. Johnny adopted Ted, giving him the last name Bundy. He grew up in a stable, working-class household with several half-siblings who came along after Louise's marriage. By high school, Ted was described as shy but intelligent. He participated in some activities but didn't form many close friendships. In hindsight, classmates and family members sometimes recalled incidents where Ted's demeanor would shift. He could be charming one moment, then oddly distant the next. He excelled academically, winning a scholarship to the University of Puget Sound before transferring to the University of Washington. People who met him in college found him articulate, a bit reserved, yet often engaging when discussing topics that interested him, like politics or law. During his college years, Ted dated a girl who would later be referred to under pseudonyms, like Stephanie Brooks, in various accounts. This relationship was meaningful to him, but it ended abruptly. The heartbreak seemed to shake him deeply. Some biographers point to this breakup as a psychological trigger, suggesting it contributed to a new darkness brewing inside him. Despite the heartbreak, Ted pressed forward with his studies. He bounced between majors, dabbling in psychology and even getting involved in local politics. He volunteered for political campaigns, learning the art of persuasion. Publicly, he was a polite, clean-cut student, known to impress older adults with his courtesy. This image of an upstanding young man would later contrast sharply with the horrors to come. In the background, though, law enforcement agencies across several states would soon contend with unsolved disappearances and murders of young women. At this point, nobody had connected those crimes, nor would they suspect the unassuming Ted Bundy. But the stage was quietly being set, and the first steps of a chilling chapter in American crime history had already begun. After graduating from the University of Washington in 1972 with a degree in psychology, Ted Bundy's life seemed to be on a promising track. He worked for the state's Republican Party, displaying a knack for organization and public relations. Around the same time, he reconnected with his former girlfriend, fueling hopes of a rekindled romance. He also gained acceptance into several law schools, an achievement that impressed those around him. Yet success wasn't all it seemed. Ted struggled with his first year at law school in Utah. Despite being intelligent, he found himself overwhelmed by the rigorous demands of his classes. His professors noted that Ted rarely participated in study groups, preferring to navigate the coursework alone. This isolation, combined with academic pressure, triggered stress. Eventually, he stopped attending classes altogether. Meanwhile, in Washington state, police had begun investigating strange disappearances of female college students. Between early 1974 and mid-1974, several young women vanished from campuses like the University of Washington and nearby institutions. Investigators found few clues. Often, the women had last been seen heading to or from class. Some eyewitnesses spoke of a man with his arm in a sling or on crutches, asking for help loading books into a car, a Volkswagen Bug. The man introduced himself as Ted. But the link was tenuous and nobody knew the suspect's full identity. Ted's personal life also took a complicated turn. The girlfriend he'd once admired and lost was back in the picture, but their reunion was rocky. Meanwhile, he began dating another woman in Utah. Balancing two relationships, Ted displayed an uncanny ability to present different versions of himself. Loving partner on one hand, distant and moody companion on the other. Colleagues who encountered him in political work sometimes remarked he could be both charismatic and strangely aloof. In the summer of 1974, the situation escalated in Washington. Two women disappeared on the same day, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, from Lake Sammamish State Park. Witnesses again recalled a charming man with his arm in a sling, calling himself Ted, who asked for help. The detail that he drove a Volkswagen Bug began to spread among investigators. For the first time, law enforcement had a partial description. Flyers were circulated and tips began pouring in from the public. Some who knew Ted Bundy started to wonder if this Ted could be the same man they encountered in real life. A handful of acquaintances submitted his name to the police tip line, but with thousands of suggestions coming in, it would take time for officers to review them all thoroughly. Meanwhile, Bundy made plans to leave the state and pursue law school elsewhere, ready to leave behind the mounting suspicions that no one had yet confronted him about. In the months ahead, the pattern of young women disappearing would appear again in different states. The name Ted, the sling or cast ruse, and the Volkswagen Bug would emerge repeatedly, though the dots were not yet fully connected. In the fall of 1974, Ted Bundy moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, to attend law school at the University of Utah. He rented a modest apartment and seemed determined to restart his legal studies. Utah's tranquil mountains and the new academic environment promised a fresh beginning, yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, dread was spreading across the western United States. Women continued to vanish in states like Colorado, Idaho, and Utah. The crimes bore eerie similarities. Many victims were young, college-aged, and disappeared at night or during solitary activities like hitchhiking or walking to class. Some survived close encounters, reporting a charming man driving a light-colored Volkswagen Bug, who tried luring them into his car. Fear gripped several campuses, causing female students to avoid nighttime travel alone. Although law enforcement agencies in different states had not fully coordinated, the accumulation of unsolved cases was becoming hard to ignore. Each region had composite sketches depicting a handsome man with clean-cut hair and sometimes a sling or cast. Investigators were uncertain if they were hunting one suspect or multiple, but the name Ted kept cropping up in witness statements. In Utah, Bundy tried to blend in. He joined study groups, attended social events, and worked part-time. Yet he struggled academically once more. Professors observed he wasn't deeply engaged, and classmates found him polite but somewhat distant. At times, he vanished from campus for days without explanation. If anyone questioned him, he offered excuses about visiting friends or dealing with personal matters. Behind the scenes, the net of suspicion was slowly tightening. Former acquaintances in Washington recalled hearing about a suspect named Ted, with a Volkswagen, and they couldn't help but think of Bundy. Some even phoned their local police, but with limited evidence, investigators could only keep his name on a watch list. The West was large, and the internal communications among various police forces were not streamlined. Late in 1974, a significant break occurred. A young woman in Murray, Utah went missing, and her body was discovered weeks later in a nearby canyon. Forensics indicated foul play, echoing the patterns found in Washington cases. Then, another Utah woman narrowly escaped a kidnapping attempt by a man in a VW Bug. She provided a detailed description to police, including the suspect's hair color, build, and accent. It was enough for local detectives to suspect a single predator was active in the area. Meanwhile, Bundy maintained phone contact with his girlfriends, weaving separate narratives. One lived in Washington, another in Utah. Neither woman knew the full extent of his double life. Bundy continued volunteering for local political activities, occasionally traveling across state lines for reasons he never fully explained. To casual observers, he appeared normal, if a bit scattered in his commitments. By the end of 1974, a wave of anxiety had overtaken many colleges in Utah and surrounding states. Rumors of a killer on the loose spread quickly in dorms and coffee shops. Even so, actual arrests remained elusive, and Ted Bundy walked calmly among his fellow students, no closer to being caught, yet. Everything began to change in August 1975, when Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward was on a routine patrol in a suburban area near Salt Lake City. Late at night, he noticed a Volkswagen Bug driving with its lights off, then speeding away as soon as the driver spotted the patrol car. Suspecting a possible burglary or DUI, Hayward followed the car and eventually pulled it over. The driver was Ted Bundy. He appeared calm but nervous, offering polite answers. Officer Hayward found it strange that Bundy's passenger seat was missing, and a quick search of the vehicle yielded odd items: handcuffs, a crowbar, an ice pick, torn strips of cloth, and other paraphernalia that suggested more than a simple burglary kit. Bundy claimed these items were for household repairs or hobbies. Despite the tension of the moment, he carried himself with a confident air. Though the items seemed suspicious, the law enforcement procedures required more evidence to hold him. Nevertheless, Hayward noted Bundy's name and car details, launching a chain of events that would soon intensify. Investigators, alerted by this peculiar traffic stop, began connecting Bundy's name to earlier tips from Washington. The presence of suspicious tools in his car aligned with the pattern of abductions in Utah, Washington, and Colorado. Shortly thereafter, Carol Duranch, a young woman from Murray, Utah, came forward with a harrowing story. Months earlier, she had been approached by a man posing as a police officer. He claimed someone had tried to break into her car and asked her to accompany him to the station. Alarm bells rang in her mind, and when she refused to get out of his vehicle, he produced a gun or crowbar. Carol managed to fight him off, escaping from the car. She now identified Ted Bundy's VW Bug and recognized him from a photo lineup as her attacker. This testimony gave police enough grounds to formally charge Bundy with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. For the first time, he stood in front of a courtroom, maintaining a demeanor of innocence. He dressed neatly, acted courteous, and insisted on his own unwavering morality. Many who met him found it hard to believe he could commit such crimes. The Carol Duranch case became a turning point. It showed that Bundy had a modus operandi of ruses and manipulations, and it linked him directly to a victim who survived. Meanwhile, investigators in Colorado and Washington started re-examining their unsolved cases, suspecting that Bundy's involvement might be broader. As 1975 ended, Ted Bundy faced serious charges. He posted bail, returning to a semblance of normal life while awaiting trial. Yet the local press began picking up on rumors, speculating that this clean-cut law student could be responsible for far more than one botched kidnapping. Friends and acquaintances were stunned. Some refused to believe the allegations, while others started to question every strange moment they'd ever noticed around him. Ted Bundy's trial for the attempted kidnapping of Carol Duranch began in February 1976 in Salt Lake City. On the surface, it looked like a fairly straightforward case. Duranch identified Bundy as the man who lured her into his vehicle under false pretenses and tried to handcuff her. Physical evidence, including the handcuffs themselves, pointed back to him. Bundy's defense argued that Duranch was mistaken, that she was frightened and confused in the dark, and that Ted Bundy was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Despite his lawyer's efforts, Bundy was found guilty. The judge sentenced him to prison for up to 15 years. This marked the first time Bundy faced real consequences for his actions. Yet the conviction was specifically for the assault on Duranche. He had not been charged with murder. Meanwhile, investigators in other states were gathering evidence, suspecting Bundy in multiple homicides. Soon after he began serving his sentence, Colorado authorities charged Bundy with the murder of Karen Campbell, a nurse who disappeared from a hotel in Aspen, Colorado. Her body had been found in a snowy area near a road, showing signs consistent with earlier unsolved murders. Police believed Bundy matched descriptions of a man seen around the hotel on the night Campbell vanished. Bundy was transferred to Aspen in 1977 to await trial for Campbell's murder. Despite the serious nature of the charge, he appeared confident, even enthusiastic about representing himself in court. This granted him certain freedoms, such as access to the law library in the Pitkin County Courthouse. Detectives from multiple jurisdictions watched with growing concern, fearing that a clever Bundy might try something bold. Their fears were realized when Bundy made his first dramatic escape. While in the courthouse library, he jumped from a second-story window and fled. A massive manhunt ensued, with law enforcement scouring the mountains around Aspen. Bundy, unfamiliar with the rugged terrain, ended up lost in the wilderness. After several days, cold and exhausted, he broke into a cabin for supplies. Police captured him soon after, bringing him back into custody. The daring escape only heightened his notoriety. People began to see him as cunning, dangerous, and more than just a suspect on trial. Still determined to avoid a life behind bars, Bundy prepared another escape plan. On December 30, 1977, while awaiting trial in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, he crawled through a light fixture hole in the ceiling of his jail cell. He escaped onto the roof, then walked out of the building wearing regular clothes. By the time authorities realized he was missing, Bundy was already on a bus headed to Chicago. The double escapes alarmed law enforcement across the nation. This was no ordinary suspect. He was cunning, resourceful, and unafraid to take risks. In the weeks to come, Bundy's flight would lead him to new locations, and tragically, more victims before the final showdown. In early January 1978, Ted Bundy arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, under a stolen identity. After his second escape from a Colorado jail, he had traveled cross-country by bus, train, and occasionally stolen cars. Tired and desperate, he ended up in a college town, thinking he could blend in easily with the constant turnover of students. He rented a room at a place called the Oaks, a small boarding house near the Florida State University (FSU) campus. Bundy called himself Chris Hagen, forging documents to support his lie. With no real plan, little money, and a stolen credit card here or there, he tried to appear as just another student. Residents of the Oaks noticed he kept odd hours and seemed guarded about his background, but no one suspected the infamous fugitive from the West. Unfortunately, Bundy's arrival in Tallahassee would soon lead to his most brutal acts. Late on January 14, 1978, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house, a large home where several FSU students lived. In the early morning hours of January 15, he violently attacked 4 women in their rooms. The rampage left 2 young women, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, dead, and 2 others seriously injured. Bundy used a piece of wood and his bare hands, leaving the crime scene in chaos. Shock and fear gripped the FSU community. Students locked their doors and rumors spread of a crazed intruder. Police arrived to a horrifying scene. The attacker had fled, leaving few immediate clues besides some bite marks and footprints. The Florida media seized on the tragedy, calling it one of the most vicious attacks in the state's history. The public had no idea yet that the attacker was the same man suspected of numerous murders across the country. Just blocks away in another apartment, Bundy launched another assault on Cheryl Thomas. She survived but sustained severe injuries. The quick succession of attacks, along with similar signs of violence and forced entry, made investigators suspect a single predator. Witness accounts described a man with dark hair, wearing inconspicuous clothes, who slipped into homes under cover of darkness. Within days, Florida police learned from the FBI that a suspect named Ted Bundy had escaped from Colorado and was on the loose. Mugshots were circulated, and sketches of Bundy appeared in newspapers. However, he'd already killed again. On February 9, 1978, the body of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach was found near Lake City, Florida. She had vanished from her junior high school the morning of February 9. Bundy's involvement wasn't confirmed yet, but local authorities suspected him the moment they heard the name Ted Bundy connected to the Chi Omega attacks. The net was closing fast. Bundy had left a bloody trail in Florida, and the entire state was on high alert. Roadblocks were set up, and the Florida Highway Patrol doubled their efforts. No one knew where he might strike next, or if the unpredictable killer would try to flee once more. Just days after the murder of Kimberly Leach, Ted Bundy drifted aimlessly around Florida, aware that his faces and aliases were being broadcast on the news. His resources were dwindling. He stole a car, hoping to head west or possibly slip down into South Florida where he might find an escape route. The roads were patrolled heavily, however, and Bundy faced greater risk than ever of being recognized. On February 15, 1978, in Pensacola, Florida, Bundy's journey met an abrupt end. Officer David Lee of the Pensacola Police Department noticed a suspicious car, its license plates not matching the vehicle's description. When Lee pulled the car over, the driver identified himself as Kenneth Meisner. Unconvinced, Officer Lee ran a check and discovered the plates were stolen. When asked to exit the vehicle, Bundy attacked Officer Lee in a desperate attempt to flee. After a brief struggle, Lee overpowered him. Back at the station, Bundy refused to give his real name, though he mentioned, "I wish you had killed me," hinting at the desperation roiling within him. Over time, authorities took his fingerprints and verified his identity. The infamous Ted Bundy, the fugitive from Colorado, now stood captured in Florida, suspected of multiple attacks in Tallahassee and the murder of a young girl in Lake City. A wave of relief swept across law enforcement. The manhunt ended, but a new phase, securing convictions, began. Florida prosecutors aimed for swift justice, especially in the Chi Omega murders. The evidence was grim. Witnesses saw a man resembling Bundy near the sorority house. Bite marks on one victim matched Bundy's teeth, and a mask found near the scene was linked to him. Bundy, though, insisted on his innocence. He relished the media attention, often smirking or toying with reporters' questions. In jail, Bundy's mood swung between calm cooperation and outbursts of frustration. He took advantage of Florida's legal system to represent himself at times, sitting at the defense table in a jail jumpsuit, flipping through law books. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse whenever Bundy appeared, with journalists filming every moment. America watched the spectacle unfold on the nightly news. Meanwhile, investigators from Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho tried coordinating with Florida authorities, hoping their unsolved murders would also be addressed. But the Florida court system moved quickly, focusing first on the Chi Omega killings. Bundy's attorneys tried delaying the trial, arguing he couldn't receive a fair shake with so much media attention. Judges disagreed, stating that the crimes were so heinous and the evidence so strong that justice needed to proceed. By spring 1978, Ted Bundy's name was plastered across every major news outlet in America. Some of his old friends, ex-girlfriends, and co-workers watched in disbelief. The polite, intelligent, even charming man they knew stood accused of monstrous acts. For the families of victims, Bundy's arrest offered a glimmer of closure, though the legal battles that lay ahead would prove long and emotionally draining. The trial for the Chi Omega murders began in June 1979 in Miami, Florida, having been moved from Tallahassee due to concerns about a fair jury. Even with the change of venue, intense media coverage was unavoidable. Ted Bundy chose to handle parts of his own defense, sitting alongside his appointed attorneys, often sporting a confident expression that baffled onlookers. He wore neat suits and tried to appear every bit the law student, not a suspected serial killer. Prosecutors outlined the brutal attacks of January 15, 1978, describing how Bundy allegedly broke into the Chi Omega sorority house and bludgeoned 4 women, killing Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and leaving 2 others gravely injured. The survivors testified, recalling the chilling moments of assault in the dark. Forensic experts highlighted key evidence, including the distinctive bite marks found on Lisa Levy's body. A forensic odontologist compared these marks to an impression of Bundy's teeth, stating they were a match. The bite mark evidence became a focal point. Defense lawyers argued that matching teeth to bruises could be subjective. However, the prosecution brought in multiple experts who reinforced the match with specialized measurements. Juries in the late 1970s were often swayed by forensic evidence, and this type of testimony carried considerable weight. Adding to the drama, Bundy questioned witnesses himself at times. He tried to project an air of authority, addressing the court with legal jargon. To some, he appeared arrogant, certain he could outsmart the system. Reporters took note of every moment, capturing Bundy's smirks or the sideways glances he directed at the jury. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Among the most emotional testimonies was that of Chi Omega survivors. One recounted waking up to see a man standing over her with a log or club. Another described hearing screams down the hallway before her own attack. Family members of the deceased watched with grief, forced to relive the horror through every grim detail. The prosecution argued that only someone with knowledge of the house layout could have moved so quickly from room to room. In response, Bundy's defense called into question the reliability of witness identifications, especially under the stress of a nighttime attack. They pointed out no one saw his face clearly, and that the alleged weapon wasn't recovered. Still, the accumulation of forensic links, plus the suspicious timeline of Bundy's presence in Tallahassee, formed a solid case. On July 24, 1979, the jury delivered its verdict. Ted Bundy was found guilty of the Chi Omega murders and the attempted murders of the other sorority sisters. In a separate proceeding, he was also found guilty of assault on Cheryl Thomas. The verdict wasn't a surprise given the overwhelming evidence, but the swiftness of deliberation stunned observers. In a dramatic sentencing phase, Bundy was handed the death penalty, an outcome that signaled a final turn in the once unstoppable spree killer's narrative. Following his conviction and death sentence for the Chi Omega murders, Ted Bundy stood trial for the abduction and murder of Kimberly Leach. The 12-year-old girl had disappeared from her junior high school in Lake City, Florida, on February 9, 1978, and her body was later found in a nearby wooded area. This trial took place in 1980, and it was arguably even more emotionally charged than the Chi Omega proceedings. The disappearance of a child struck a deeper chord with the public. Kim was a bright, cheerful kid, close to her family and friends. The thought that she could be taken from her school grounds in broad daylight horrified parents nationwide. Prosecutors, determined to secure another ironclad conviction, presented a range of evidence placing Bundy in Lake City on that day. Key items included eyewitness accounts of a man resembling Bundy near the school parking lot. A van matching descriptions of Bundy's stolen vehicle was spotted in the area. Additionally, fibers found on Kim's clothing were consistent with the materials in that van. Bundy's defense attempted to dispute the eyewitness reliability, but the circumstantial evidence piled up. Emotional testimony from Kim's family drove home the devastating impact of the crime. Throughout the trial, Bundy exhibited various moods. Sometimes he acted casual, joking with his defense lawyers. Other times he appeared agitated, pacing or scribbling notes. He repeated his stance of innocence, claiming he was nowhere near Lake City on that day. Nevertheless, the prosecution used gas station receipts, stolen credit card records, and other documents to show Bundy's movements. They painted a picture of a man on the run, willing to do anything to avoid capture, including taking the life of a child who unfortunately crossed his path. As in the Chi Omega trial, Bundy tried to personally cross-examine witnesses, occasionally clashing with the judge. The spectacle attracted crowds. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others sought justice for Kimberly Leach. The press cameras captured the tension of every witness, from forensic experts to grieving relatives. Once again, the jury deliberated and returned with a guilty verdict. The brutality of the crime, the age of the victim, and the strong evidence sealed Bundy's fate. He was sentenced to death for the second time. Judge Wallace Jopling presided over the sentencing, stating that Bundy's acts were extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile, echoing words used in earlier statements by other judges. Bundy's supporters, though far fewer than before, claimed he'd been railroaded, ignoring the mountain of evidence. Most of America, however, believed justice had been served. Two separate death penalties now loomed over Bundy's head. For Kimberly Leach's family, the conviction provided some sense of closure, but no true solace could undo the loss of their daughter. In Florida's judicial system, the clock began ticking on Bundy's appeals process, which would stretch on for nearly a decade, prolonging the final chapter of his story. As Ted Bundy's legal battles continued, the media took an unprecedented interest in his life and trials. Television stations broadcast updates on his appeals, while newspapers ran detailed stories analyzing every twist. Some described him as a chameleon, who moved effortlessly between charming graduate student and ruthless killer. Psychologists appeared on talk shows, speculating about his motives and mental state. One of the strangest moments in this media circus was Ted Bundy's marriage to Carol Ann Boone. Boone had worked with Bundy at the Washington State Department of Emergency Services years earlier. She moved to Florida to support him through his trials. During the sentencing phase of his trial for Kimberly Leach's murder, Bundy called Boone to the witness stand and, in a peculiar legal maneuver, asked her to marry him. Under Florida law, if this exchange occurred in a courtroom with a judge present, it could be recognized as a valid marriage declaration. Boone accepted, and Bundy pronounced them man and wife before the astonished court. This bizarre episode added to Bundy's notoriety, making headlines nationwide. Observers debated whether it was a ploy to gain sympathy, a twisted show of power, or a genuine display of affection. Boone, who insisted on his innocence, later gave birth to a daughter believed to be Bundy's child, though how that was accomplished in prison remains a subject of speculation. Meanwhile, Bundy pursued appeals vigorously. He argued that his defense had been rushed and that the publicity made a fair trial impossible. He also questioned the validity of the bite mark evidence, calling it junk science. Appellate courts, however, repeatedly upheld his convictions. Judges cited overwhelming evidence against him: eyewitnesses, physical clues, and Bundy's own inconsistent accounts. During these appeals, Bundy granted multiple interviews to journalists, authors, and TV reporters. He provided contradictory statements. Sometimes he maintained he was innocent, other times he hinted he was involved but wouldn't confess outright. He relished attention, discussing legal strategies and playing cat and mouse with interviewers. Public opinion remained largely hostile. Many saw him as a manipulator continuing to torment victims' families by refusing to tell the full truth. In the face of mounting legal defeats, Bundy's confidence began to erode. He fired or replaced lawyers, tried representing himself again, then reversed course. Boone stood by him publicly, but cracks appeared in that relationship too, especially as execution dates drew near. Florida's judicial system was not swayed by Bundy's tactics, and a sense of inevitability surrounded the conclusion. The extended delays weighed heavily on families of victims, who felt Bundy was exploiting every loophole to postpone execution. Yet the press continued to cover his appeals daily, fascinated by the spectacle of a convicted serial killer who seemed unrepentant. This chapter of Bundy's life underscored his flair for the theatrical, a trait that would linger all the way to his final days on Florida's death row. By the late 1980s, Ted Bundy's appeals had run their course through state and federal courts. The Florida Supreme Court and U.S. Supreme Court found no legal basis to overturn his convictions. Judges and prosecutors had grown weary of Bundy's constant filings, each claiming some new technicality. With execution dates looming, Bundy faced the end of the road in Rayford Prison. In a last-ditch effort to delay, Bundy began hinting he had information about other unsolved murders. He hinted that he could help authorities locate missing bodies if given more time. This strategy aimed to create an incentive for the courts to postpone his execution. Indeed, law enforcement agencies from several states were anxious for any leads that could help families of the missing find closure. During interviews with investigators from Washington, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado, Bundy admitted involvement in crimes he had long denied. Although he never produced a comprehensive list of victims, each new confession added weight to suspicions about just how vast his killing spree might have been. Some investigators believed his final tally could exceed 30 homicides, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. However, Bundy's selective memory and manipulative tendencies left them uncertain which confessions were genuine. Bundy also sat down for recorded interviews with Special Agent Bill Hagmaier of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. Hagmaier specialized in understanding the psychology of murderers. Over time, Bundy spoke more openly about his method, using charm, a cast or sling ruse, and his intelligence to lure victims. He described how he would approach young women, feigning injury or helplessness, before overpowering them. While these confessions provided insight, they were too late to help Bundy legally. The courts viewed them as ploys to gain sympathy and time. Families of victims expressed outrage, describing Bundy's confessions as too little, too late, and accusing him of manipulating emotions once more. Some families did, however, find marginal relief in knowing how or where their loved ones' final moments occurred, though it was a grim sort of solace. Bundy's wife, Carol Ann Boone, eventually distanced herself. She had difficulty reconciling his confessions with her prior belief in his innocence. Reports suggest she moved away and ceased visiting him regularly. The daughter they supposedly shared had no real relationship with him. Bundy's world shrank, centered on a small prison cell where he spent his final nights pondering a swift approach of justice. With one final execution date set, Bundy tried to reach out to religious counselors, offering partial confessions and blaming pornography or childhood trauma for his crimes. Some observers saw this as a last attempt to shape his legacy. Others felt it was merely another manipulation. In either case, the legal system stood firm. Bundy's countdown to the electric chair continued, and there would be no more reprieves from the governor's office or the courts. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy's life came to its end in the Florida State Prison electric chair, often referred to as Old Sparky. The morning dawned cold and tense. Outside the prison gates, a crowd gathered, some holding signs demanding justice for the victims, others simply curious or drawn to the spectacle. News vans lined the roads broadcasting live updates. In the final hours, Bundy was offered the chance for a special last meal. Unlike some inmates who make elaborate requests, Bundy reportedly refused to pick anything, so he was given the standard prison breakfast. Religious advisors visited, though his sincerity in embracing faith at the last minute remained questionable. Guards described him as nervous, pacing in his cell, occasionally muttering to himself. Shortly after dawn, Bundy was led to the execution chamber. He was strapped into the wooden chair, a leather mask placed over his face. Officials asked if he had any last words. He mumbled brief acknowledgments, expressing love for his family, but made no sweeping confession or apology. Witnesses, including law enforcement officials and some family members of victims, watched from behind a glass window. When the switch was thrown, an electrical current surged through Bundy's body, ending the life of one of America's most notorious serial killers. The official time of death was noted, and a prison doctor confirmed it. Within minutes, the crowd outside erupted in cheers, some setting off fireworks or toasting with drinks. The mood was triumphant, as though a terrible chapter had finally closed. Reactions varied. Many victims' relatives felt relief. They had endured years of trials, appeals, and manipulations by Bundy. Knowing he could no longer cause harm allowed them to breathe easier. Some critics, opposed to the death penalty, questioned whether execution truly brought closure. Others insisted Bundy had shown zero remorse and that society was safer without him. News organizations worldwide reported on Bundy's execution, detailing his crimes and confessions. Psychiatrists offered opinions on his narcissism and lack of empathy. The FBI's behavioral science unit referenced Bundy's case for years as a prime example of a sociopathic killer who wore normalcy like a mask. In the aftermath, speculation continued about victims still unaccounted for. Bundy hinted that the official list of his crimes was incomplete, but he took many secrets to his grave. Investigators and amateur sleuths kept searching for evidence linking him to other unsolved cases. Some families of missing women still wondered if Bundy was the culprit, clinging to the hope of finding answers. Yet, for most of America, January 24, 1989, signaled the end of a twisted saga. The man who once studied law, volunteered in politics, and fooled many into seeing a kind face was gone. The name Ted Bundy became shorthand for evil hidden behind charm, a cautionary tale of trusting appearances. The chapters of his life had been filled with horror, but at last the final page was turned. With Ted Bundy executed, one might assume the case files would close. But for many law enforcement agencies in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado, the work went on. They hoped to connect Bundy definitively to cold cases, providing closure for families who still lacked answers. Detectives revisited old evidence with renewed vigor, combing through photographs, notes, and any preserved items that might reveal Bundy's involvement. One challenge was the limited forensic technology of the time. DNA testing was still in its infancy in the late 1980s. Many crime scenes from Bundy's suspected spree dated back to the early 1970s, where evidence either deteriorated or was discarded. Some agencies discovered that hair samples or blood stains had been lost. Others found their records incomplete. Each small breakthrough, however, offered hope. A single partial fingerprint match or a forensic link to a piece of clothing could solidify a case. Families of missing women sometimes contacted the FBI or local police, convinced Bundy was responsible. They'd ask if he confessed to their loved one's disappearance. The replies varied. Bundy provided partial admissions but was evasive or forgetful on details. In some cases, he flat-out denied involvement. For certain families, the answers never came. They could only speculate. Meanwhile, criminologists and psychologists studied Bundy's taped interviews. He was a rare kind of serial offender, outwardly intelligent and socially adept, able to navigate politics and higher education. They noted his manipulative charm, describing him as a textbook sociopath, someone lacking genuine empathy, yet skilled at feigning emotion. His rumored childhood humiliations, heartbreak, or exposure to violent pornography might have fueled his pathology, but experts agreed that no single factor could fully explain his crimes. Universities even started offering courses on criminal psychology referencing Bundy. Future detectives learned from the mistakes made during the multi-state hunt, especially the need for better interdepartmental communication. Had data sharing been more efficient in the 1970s, Bundy's spree might have ended sooner. The FBI's VICAP, Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, eventually became an essential tool in linking repeat offenders across jurisdictions. Public fascination with Bundy remained strong. Over the next decade, books, documentaries, and TV specials appeared, each dissecting his life. Survivors of his attacks, like Carol Duranch, sometimes spoke out, describing how they overcame the trauma. The message was one of awareness. Predators can appear ordinary, even likable, making vigilance crucial. In some corners, a disturbing form of Bundy fandom emerged, with individuals writing him letters during his incarceration or collecting news clippings as souvenirs. Psychologists cautioned that this phenomenon revealed more about the admirer's desire for notoriety or thrill than about Bundy himself. Meanwhile, serious true crime researchers sorted fact from myth, striving to keep the focus on the victims and the lessons gleaned from the case. Thus, the legacy of Ted Bundy was twofold: an emblem of monstrous deception and a catalyst for improvements in how law enforcement tracks serial criminals. Even after his death, the ripples of his actions pressed investigators and the public to better understand, and hopefully prevent, such horrors from recurring. Though the media spotlight often shone on Ted Bundy himself, his intellect, his charm, his crimes, it's vital to remember that dozens of individuals suffered as a direct result of his actions. Some lost their lives, others survived brutal attacks, carrying emotional and physical scars. These victims spanned multiple states, from Washington to Florida, each with hopes and dreams cut short or forever altered. At the University of Washington, memorials were held for women who disappeared in 1974. Friends recalled their kindness, their love of music or dance, and the heartbreak of never knowing exactly how their final hours unfolded. Parents spoke of their daughters' ambitions. Some wanted to become nurses, teachers, or artists. The partial confessions Ted Bundy offered could not ease the grief. In Colorado, the families of Karen Campbell and several other women struggled with unanswered questions. Some found slight relief in Bundy's guilt verdicts, believing him responsible for their loved ones' fates. Others never received an admission tying him definitively to their daughter's disappearance, leaving an open wound. Memorial scholarships or benches were sometimes established in honor of these missing women, attempts to ensure they weren't forgotten. Florida carried its own sorrow. The sorority sisters of Chi Omega who survived did so with psychological burdens, haunted by nightmares and anxiety. They recalled hearing footsteps in the dark, the sudden terror of an intruder. The families of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy kept their memories alive with tributes. Meanwhile, the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach remained the most heart-wrenching example of how indiscriminate Bundy's violence could be. At her school, teachers placed a small plaque or memory garden in her honor, reminding future generations that behind the headlines was a real, beloved child. Some survivors took steps to advocate for victims' rights. They supported legislation allowing victims or their families to speak at sentencing. They also called for better coordination among law enforcement agencies so no other predator could exploit jurisdictional gaps. Groups formed to offer counseling and emotional support for those who encountered or lost someone to violent crimes. The goal: to turn personal tragedy into a push for meaningful reform. Beyond the direct victims, entire campuses changed their security measures. Dorms installed more robust locks, escorted nighttime walk programs grew, and campus police expanded. Women's self-defense classes saw a surge in attendance, spurred by fear but also empowerment. The media coverage of Bundy's manipulative tactics, his fake sling, his pleas for help, urged people to be cautious about strangers, no matter how polite or well-spoken they seemed. In the end, the victims' stories collectively serve as a powerful reminder that behind every serial killer headline are real families, real friends, and real futures lost. While Bundy's name endures in infamy, the voices of those he harmed deserve to remain at the forefront, reminding society that each statistic in the final tally was once a cherished individual with a unique story and a life yet to be fully lived. The revelations around Ted Bundy's cross-state crime spree exposed critical flaws in the American law enforcement system of the 1970s. Different police departments lacked real-time data sharing, allowing Bundy to strike in Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado without immediate coordination among agencies. Officers in each region worked tirelessly but had no central system to spot a pattern. Following Bundy's eventual capture, state and federal officials recognized the necessity for a more unified approach. The FBI's VICAP program, launched in 1985, became a national database for violent crimes. VICAP collected details on homicides and missing persons, enabling law enforcement to cross-reference modus operandi, suspect descriptions, and evidence. While it didn't exist in time to stop Bundy, it undoubtedly helped catch other predators years later. Ted Bundy's cunning also influenced how officers interrogate suspects. Investigators learned that a seemingly well-educated, articulate man could still lie with ease. Bundy's ability to use psychological manipulation on both victims and authorities underscored the importance of thorough interrogation techniques, background checks, and forensic evidence. Specialists in behavioral science began emphasizing the difference between criminals with situational motives and those, like Bundy, who killed due to deep-seated psychopathic traits. Additionally, Bundy's repeated escapes led to stricter courtroom security measures. Judges no longer allowed murder suspects to wander libraries unattended, no matter their legal credentials. Jails fortified ceilings and made escape hatches more difficult to access. Bundy's bold escapes taught officials that intelligence and desperation made for a volatile mix. Another significant shift occurred in public awareness. College campuses boosted safety resources, better lit walkways, emergency call boxes, and structured policies for strangers asking for help. Self-defense workshops, especially for women, sprang up across the country. The advice to be cautious about who you trust wasn't new, but Bundy's MO, appearing as an injured man, amplified the message. The Ted Bundy case also drew attention to the concept of serial killers as a distinct class of criminal. While such killers existed long before Bundy, the term serial killer gained widespread recognition partly due to the media's coverage of him and other infamous murderers in the same era. Criminologists studied how Bundy selected victims, how he might have tested or perfected methods, and how he concealed evidence. These insights informed future profiling techniques, enabling investigators to piece together patterns more swiftly. Finally, Bundy's arrests, trials, and confessions highlighted the critical role of survivor testimony. Carol Duranche's decision to speak out about her near-kidnapping created a crucial link. Her ability to identify Bundy in court, and the physical evidence from that attack, became the linchpin for his conviction. This emphasized the importance of taking survivors' accounts seriously and preserving every shred of evidence, no matter how small. In short, while Ted Bundy's rampage represented a terrible failure of oversight and communication across multiple states, the lessons learned spurred reforms in policing, forensics, and public safety, concrete steps aimed at preventing another Bundy from evading capture for so long. Decades after Ted Bundy's execution, he remains a disturbing fixture in American pop culture. Documentaries, docudramas, podcasts, and even theatrical films depict his story from various angles: the cunning predator, the charming law student, the pathological liar. Viewers remain captivated by how an outwardly respectable man could conceal such horrific impulses. Psychologists often cite Bundy as a prime example of a mask of sanity, a concept describing how sociopaths blend into society by imitating normal emotions. Audiences are both horrified and fascinated by the dual nature he presented, volunteering at a crisis hotline by day, murdering by night. This shocking contrast fuels an endless stream of media analysis. Publishers release diaries, correspondences, or interview transcripts that claim fresh insights, though they often recycle the same facts. Families of victims have expressed mixed feelings about the commercial exploitation. Some wish the public would stop glorifying Bundy with endless TV specials, instead urging people to remember the victims. Others acknowledge that retelling the story can serve as a warning about personal safety and the reality of evil that can lurk behind a friendly face. Remarkably, Bundy has garnered something of a twisted fan following. During his trials, women wrote him love letters, believing they understood the real Ted. Even today, internet forums exist where users analyze his photographs or dispute the number of murders. This subculture puzzles mental health experts, who connect it to a phenomenon where certain individuals are drawn to dangerous figures. They stress that such interest can dangerously minimize the horrific harm he inflicted. True crime tours in places like Seattle, Salt Lake City, or Tallahassee sometimes include spots associated with Bundy. Guides provide grim commentary, walking the line between historical recounting and sensationalism. These tours underscore how profoundly Bundy's crimes shaped local lore. Neighborhoods that once felt safe recall how easily a single figure shattered that security. Writers often cite Bundy's high intelligence. He soared through IQ tests and manipulated legal processes for years. Some wonder whether he could have lived a productive life had he channeled his intellect differently. But experts dismiss any notion of wasted potential, pointing to his cruelty as evidence that brilliance alone cannot mask a deeply rooted pathology. Meanwhile, younger generations encounter Bundy's story on streaming services, sometimes unaware that it's not just a dramatic thriller. They learn that real families mourn real daughters. Educators occasionally incorporate the Bundy case into criminology or psychology classes, spurring conversations about criminal profiling, mental health, and victims' rights. This ongoing fascination reveals more about societal fears than about Bundy himself. The fear that an ordinary neighbor, coworker, or student could harbor unspeakable violence. As time passes, new angles on the Bundy narrative keep emerging, yet the conclusion remains the same. He was a predator who thrived on deception, and society learned from his reign of terror, but at a devastating cost to countless innocent lives. In the years since Ted Bundy's death, researchers have tried to separate myths from facts. Early media reports often exaggerated certain details, while Bundy himself spun lies and half-truths. Sifting through archives, interviewing surviving investigators, and examining previously sealed records has helped clarify what truly occurred. One persistent myth is the idea that Bundy was solely driven by a failed romance or his exposure to certain adult materials. Though he cited these aspects, modern psychologists argue that such triggers alone do not create a serial killer. Bundy's actions pointed to a more complex pathology, possibly present from a young age: an inability to empathize, a compulsion toward violence, and a predatory need for control. Another misconception is the supernatural intelligence level often attributed to him. While Bundy was bright and manipulative, certain escapes and strategies succeeded partly because of lax security or bureaucratic gaps, not just his genius. He capitalized on weaknesses in the system, forging a myth of near invincibility. The truth is more nuanced: a cunning individual operating in an era without modern communication networks. Over time, Bundy also contradicted himself about the number of victims. He once hinted it was over 100, then scaled down to around 30, refusing to name all. This discrepancy fed sensational speculation. Investigators suspect he inflated or deflated numbers to maintain leverage, once again using secrets to postpone execution or keep the media enthralled. Biographers discovered that Bundy's family situation was more complicated than initially known. While the revelation that his grandparents pretended to be his parents might have impacted him, it's oversimplified to say it caused his violence. Many people experience family secrecy without becoming killers. The real puzzle lies in Bundy's unique personality, shaped by a perfect storm of environment, psychology, and personal choices. In parallel, new evidence and technology sometimes lead detectives to retest samples from old crime scenes. On rare occasions, DNA links certain unknown remains to Bundy's known victims, confirming suspicions. This forensics-based approach provides the most reliable final word on some cold cases. Yet the majority remain unconfirmed, leaving families to wonder if Bundy was responsible. While the mythical aura around Bundy persists, fueled by films, TV series, and sensational headlines, serious investigators caution that praising his intellect or glamorizing his story risks overshadowing the brutality he inflicted. They prefer focusing on the lessons gleaned: the necessity of thorough collaboration across law enforcement agencies, the importance of forensic science, and the crucial role that vigilant communities and survivors' testimonies play in capturing predators. Ultimately, the new century's reevaluation of Bundy's legacy calls for balance, acknowledging how deeply he impacted our understanding of serial homicide, while never forgetting the real people behind the numbers. As myths are dismantled, the stark truth is more disturbing than any legend. Ted Bundy was not a charismatic anti-hero but a remorseless murderer hiding behind a deceptive smile. In the final analysis, Ted Bundy's story remains a landmark in American criminal history, emblematic of how one individual's depravity and cunning can exploit societal gaps. He traversed multiple states, deceived loved ones, and eluded law enforcement, leaving a trail of shattered families and unanswered questions. Over 30 years after his execution, the resonance of his case still shapes conversations about crime and justice. One key takeaway is the evolution of investigative procedures. Bundy's spree underscored the urgency of communication among police departments. Modern databases, like the FBI's VICAP or CODIS, now help unify clues that would otherwise remain isolated. The failure to quickly connect Bundy's crimes across state lines is a cautionary tale. Today, a suspect with a similar pattern would have a harder time evading capture for so long. Victim advocacy also advanced. The courage of survivors like Carol Duranch illuminated how vital it is for law enforcement to listen and respond promptly. Many states enacted legislation ensuring victims have a voice in trials, parole hearings, and media coverage. These reforms encourage a shift from glorifying the offender to centering the experiences of those harmed. Bundy's psychological profile continues to guide criminal psychology training. Experts dissect his manipulative tactics to teach future investigators about red flags, sudden changes in persona, contradictory alibis, or an unusual fixation on controlling interactions. Understanding how Bundy weaponized charm warns the public against simplistic stereotypes of dangerous-looking criminals. Predators can appear well-spoken, neatly dressed, and entirely plausible. The case also reminds communities that personal safety is never guaranteed. The "help me carry my books," or "I'm injured" ruse remains one of the most chilling elements. It underscores the need to maintain healthy caution with strangers seeking assistance, especially in secluded or late-night scenarios. This caution does not suggest paranoia, but rather a sensible awareness that not all who appear friendly are benign. For families of victims, the conclusion was bittersweet. While Bundy faced the ultimate penalty, it did not bring back lost loved ones. Memorials, scholarships, and personal tributes became ways to honor those gone too soon, ensuring that their memory outlived the infamy of the killer. Many mothers, fathers, siblings, and friends spent decades rebuilding their lives. Bundy's final confessions, though incomplete, at least closed some missing person files and brought partial solace to certain families. Yet the debate persists. How many more victims remain undocumented? How many families still wonder if Bundy was responsible for their missing child or sibling? In the grand scope, Ted Bundy's saga is a chronicle of missed signals and ultimate accountability. His cunning manipulations ended in a Florida prison, overshadowed by the raw devastation he left behind. Society learned painful lessons about collaboration, the unpredictability of evil, and the importance of giving survivors a central role in seeking justice. Even as the decades pass, those lessons remain crucial, helping shape a world more alert to darkness cloaked in a polished facade.